Alistair Leinster from Useful Projects. Fiona Woolf spoke earlier about the need for integrated thinking. Recently, the major infrastructure projects still in silos, essentially HS2 Crossrail, Thames Tideway. We have to look back 150 years to the Victoria Embankment as an exemplar of proper integrated thinking for utilities, road, rail, sewers, utilities, river defences. Is it time, that was done by the Metropolitan Board of Works at the time, which put it all together. Is it time to think about the idea of an agency called Infrastructure for London, which actually allows London to think holistically in terms of planning infrastructure?
Merlene Emerson, Chinese Welfare Trust. As you know, more than 50% of Londoners are actually from the BAME non-white British communities, and no one's mentioned anything about our Londoners' community needs. Also, we should be thinking of visitors to London as well.
Okay, so what do we think about visitors, and are there particular needs with our large proportion of BME communities? There was a gentleman there, yes, with a stripy shirt. Thank you.
Hello there, Mike Diath. It's a question for the panel, really, about land pricing. In London, we suffer and I think also exploit huge land price entrepreneurialism, but that is the thing that creates unaffordable housing. I suppose, Tessa, how would you address that? But the panel, what other observations do you have on that?
And what would you do, Mike?
I think I would insist on a level of affordable housing on every site, and over time that would bring down land value.
And you'd penalise land banking, would you?
Yeah. Well, I don't know about that, but...
Oh, he doesn't know about whether he'd penalise land. Who would penalise land banking, by the way? Hands up. Okay, who wouldn't? Okay, it's a very libertarian room so far. And about 3/4 of you didn't vote. The next one's down here, Paul. And then I'd like to take 2 more people, if we may. Yes, madam, you'll go next.
Thanks very much. My name is Peter Smith. I'm from a fuel poverty charity called National Energy Action. I'm interested in the devolution debate and how it plays into the fact that the Treasury currently receives about 5 billion quid, or will receive about 5 billion quid over 5 years from struggling domestic energy consumers. I was wondering how London could best return that money back in terms of making homes more energy efficient and more sustainable. And second of all, whether or not Tess Jowl supports the idea that you shouldn't pay housing benefit to private landlords who have disgracefully poor energy efficient properties, and you could set a minimum energy threshold.
Great, what an interesting question. So you're next, madam. If you keep your hand up, Paul will see you and he'll bring the mic. And I think you're going to be the last one then. Great.
Good morning, Zagari Dex from Grosvenor. Just thinking about the housing market, and we know that it's not so much the affordable side that's missing, but the intermediate supply into the market. So what can be done on that part to increase that side of the market?
Okay, great. So the questions are to do with infrastructure and whether it's all in silos, whether more needs to be done for London's majority BME community and for visitors, whether something needs to be done to tackle land pricing, whether there could be an element of devolution that's about using energy revenues to finance energy efficiency, whether housing benefits should be paid to landlords with poor energy performance, and then whether we could do something about all sides of the housing market, not just the supply side. 2 points each, if you don't mind. We'll go Paul, Colin, Jeremy, and then we'll end with Tessa.
Yeah, just on the integrated thinking, this gentleman's question, the first question on whole place. I think there's been so many different models, total place, whole place. I'm sure you'll have your own that you remember. Personally, I think creation of more vehicles, task forces, and so on are probably of limited value. The infrastructure and capability and thinking is in place. What I believe is required is that people of the right mind, set and outlook come together to make real things happen. And when people as individuals and teams come together to make things happen, I think we can see the evidence of that working. Where I would place more emphasis on is what happens to that place when those places are developed and evolved so that they're managed for the long term in the right way. So putting some effort onto that in terms of procurement and how it's scoped in the first place, I think is important. But in terms of creating another vehicle or infrastructure around that, I think is probably of limited value. Just one other point on the lady's question about the non-white Londoners. I believe Londoners are Londoners of all race, colour and creed, and when dealing with projects or programs of work, it's what those people that live, work, commute and enjoy those places require. I think we shouldn't necessarily try and shoehorn a particular philosophy or thinking onto to groups of people or categorize them and classify them in a particular way. Yes, there are particularly localized needs that are needed for communities, but we should look at those communities as a whole and respond to their individual needs. That's all I'd say on that.
Thank you very much, Paul. Colin, your views?
On the integrated utilities, I'm not sure that an agency would help necessarily. I mean, it's interesting, we have a thought leadership program with EY, which is called London Tomorrow, and one of the things that we were discussing last week, and some of you may have seen the piece in City AM about this, is the need for a mechanism to actually get the private sector into the development of infrastructure. I think there's private money out there. We keep getting told is ready to invest. There are obviously projects, huge number of projects. As I say, go on our website, you'll see any number of projects that are needing investment. We lack that middle bit, and I think that's the key to getting infrastructure. On BME, we are going to publish some new research we've done on the value of migrant workers and immigrants to London. We believe it's crucial that London maintains the position that people who come and live and work here are vital to the success. I suspect most people in this room are like me, come from somewhere else to try and make London a success. We need to be that beacon that says, actually, amongst all the discussion about being flooded with migrant workers, actually, there's a huge, huge benefit to London that we can't do without. London would come to a halt. We'll say more research on that, and the value, especially to small firms, will be coming out from the London Chamber very, very soon. I would talk about the main point, I think, is what Tessa was talking about and I was talking about earlier before she arrived, about the need to make devolution really work. We as an organisation lobby. That's what we do. We lobby on behalf of business. We're absolutely unashamed about that. That's our role to try and make business more successful. We do a lot of lobbying on infrastructure and all of those points. But who do we lobby? We lobby central government. If the mayor or the GLA is in our camp, that's great. But actually, our main target is the Treasury, is public transport, whichever ministry it is. And that's wrong. We need to be lobbying, if Tessa is successful, we need to be lobbying Tessa or whoever is mayor, and they need to have the power to be able to do that. And it isn't just about fiscal devolution, which is vitally important, it's about powers in other areas. And just one final point about land. That's why we were so pleased that the government took up our view about the London Land Commission and this doomsday book of private land, because actually a lot of this land is in public ownership from big organizations, big public organizations, and there's obviously land in private hands that needs to be out there developed, and we need the mechanism, and the London Land Commission needs the teeth to be able to make that, whether it's the public sector or the private sector, actually free up that land, because actually with land you can build things. Yes, we've done a lot of work on school shortages, but actually the land, you need somewhere to build it first.
Thank you very much, Colin. Jeremy, reflections on 2 points?
I'll be very brief. I'm perhaps slightly less sceptical about the idea that there's more we can do to integrate infrastructure, but I think it's, given the history of the way London's developed, the privatisation of the utilities, the fact they're now regulated, means that I think it's difficult to see us moving directly to a new organisation called Infrastructure for London, or have Homes for Londoners, Transport for London, Infrastructure for London, and then you have a plethora of bodies and you wonder whether you've actually created something that's helpful. But clearly there is scope for better coordination and integration. We also look to the engineering and architectural community to come forward with those brilliant, novel, integrated transport and other schemes that can actually serve our needs over the next 35 years or so. And secondly, on sort of land, one sort of possible route out of this is to introduce land taxes to replace some other of the property taxes that we have in the capital. Undeveloped or unutilised land is one of the few bits of property that is not currently taxed in the taxation system. You might regard that as a penalty, or you might regard that as a carrying charge, depending on how you look at it. But clearly there is an opportunity cost to society as a whole if you don't develop land that you're sitting on. So that's a policy instrument which, dare I say, us policy wonks do look at, and it would be good if our political masters were brave and took this on.
Great, a call for bravery there. Dame Tessa, your reflections.
Okay, any organisation or organisation of resources like Homes for Londoners is justified by what it achieves, not the fact that it exists. So that is that's the first thing. And this is a tried and tested model. It is nothing more than assembling the necessary skills at the necessary level that we need to accelerate the rate at which homes are being built, starting on the land that the mayor owns. And here's just an illustration of the mismatch. The mayor owns, through TfL, at least 5,700 acres of land. The size, you know, in landmass terms, that's like the borough of Camden. And how many development staff does TfL have? 5. So there's a complete mismatch between the potential and the resources that are available. You know, Richard Rogers estimates that on brownfield land alone across London, you could build 500,000 or nearly 500,000 homes. So I see this very largely as a question of will. The second point, I think your question, Alistair, about integrated thinking on infrastructure. I think that what we need on infrastructure is the confidence that the decisions will be taken and the implementation will then proceed with, you know, a very clear sense of purpose. You know, we cannot have London constantly driven back, losing its potential competitive edge because London is led by interests that don't recognise the scale of the global challenge to London's position, but also the scale of the challenge to what is more broadly the livability of London, which is, can you get the best people, young people, to come and live and work in London because they can afford to and because they can find somewhere decent, decent to live. Mike, I think the point about land pricing is, you know, I would just start with the mayor's own land, and you know, getting homes building can start on the mayor's own land, and I think that if you show again pace, purpose, and resolve to build, some of the arguments about the remaining brownfield sites will fall away. But if I became mayor, the expectation would be that every borough would be building on the land which is available to them. And where boroughs are at default, that's the point at which you have intervention. I think the final point I wanted to make just about infrastructure is that there are some areas of infrastructure development which I think are probably examples of market failure. You may reach that conclusion once you've exhausted all the options that the market creates. And my kind of number one concern about this is broadband speed across London. And, you know, it simply isn't sustainable that we have these broadband black spots where suddenly, you know, the speed slows down because there's a 10 or 20 meter piece of pavement that Openreach or Virgin can't either afford to or won't go underneath in order to make the comprehensive connection. So that's something that I think any mayor should be concerned about, because it's a long-term threat to our competitiveness.
Great, Tessa, thank you very much indeed. We're going to end it there. We've been talking about live, work and move. What does London need? Please join me, if you will, in thanking Paul Kelly, Colin Stanbridge, Jeremy Skinner and Dame Tessa Jowell. Thank you very much indeed.